The drill punched through rotten brick and struck steel. Behind the condemned hotel wall sat a sealed vault. An hour later, the HOA president arrived demanding its keys. Welcome back, everyone. Before today's story begins, I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. If this is your first time on the channel, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you'll always know when a new story is released. Your support means more than you know. Every like, comment, and subscription helps this channel grow and allows us to keep sharing incredible stories with viewers around the world. And before we begin, tell me this: where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. Now, grab a comfortable seat, relax, and let's dive into today's unforgettable story. How did she know there was a vault behind that wall when I'd only discovered it 47 minutes earlier? That was the question running through my head as Vanessa Harwood stood at the bottom of my basement stairs, one hand wrapped around a leather folder, the other extended toward me like I owed her something. "Give me the key, Mr. Mercer." Behind me, a demolition hammer was still ticking as it cooled. Dust floated through the white beams of our work lights. The air smelled like wet concrete, rust, and 80 years of trapped moisture. Somewhere above us, wind pushed through a broken hotel window and made an old door bang softly against its frame. Bang. Silence. Bang. I looked at Vanessa's open hand. What key? Her expression tightened. The key to the vault. That was when the basement suddenly felt colder. My name is Ethan Mercer. I'm 42 years old, and I've spent most of my adult life restoring buildings other people had already given up on. Burned houses, flooded storefronts, a century-old courthouse annex everyone swore was one winter away from collapsing. But Blackwood Hotel was different. I'd bought the condemned place 3 weeks earlier. The county had red-tagged it after years of neglect. Half the plumbing was dead. Mold crawled behind the wallpaper. The east roof leaked badly enough that rainwater had buckled the third-floor hallway. Most people saw a demolition bill. I saw bones worth saving. That morning, my crew had been stripping damaged masonry from a basement wall when Luis, my foreman, stopped the jackhammer. "Ethan." There was something in his voice that made me put down my coffee. He tapped the exposed surface with his hammer. Clang. Not brick. Metal. We cleared another 3 feet by hand. Then 5. Behind the false wall sat a massive steel door, nearly 7 feet tall, its dark surface mottled with rust. A brass emblem shaped like a cedar tree was bolted near the center. Below it, stamped into the frame, were 3 numbers. I wiped the dust with my thumb. "Anybody see this on the plans?" Luis shook his head. Nobody had. I took 6 photographs and called my attorney, Daniel Reeves. He told me exactly what I expected him to say. Don't touch the lock. Document everything. We hadn't even figured out whether the door used a key, a combination, or both. Then tires crunched across the gravel outside. A white Lexus stopped beside our dumpster. Vanessa Harwood climbed out wearing cream slacks, polished loafers, and the expression of someone arriving to collect property she already considered hers. Vanessa was president of Cedar Ridge Estates, the HOA surrounding 3 sides of my property. She walked straight through the hotel, straight downstairs, straight to the vault. She never asked what we had found, never looked surprised. She simply demanded the key. "I own this building," I said. Vanessa smiled. "That room predates your purchase. It belongs to the association." She opened her folder and produced a photocopied map covered in yellow highlighting. I didn't take it. Instead, I looked past her toward the basement stairs. 47 minutes. That was how long the vault had been exposed. My crew hadn't left the property. I hadn't told anyone except Daniel. Yet Vanessa knew exactly where to go. I looked back at the numbers stamped into the steel, then at the cedar emblem. Something told me the most important thing behind that door wasn't whatever had been sealed inside. It was the reason Vanessa Harwood already knew it existed. 3 weeks earlier, Blackwood Hotel looked less like an investment and more like the place where investments went to die. I first saw it on a gray Thursday morning at the edge of Cedar Ridge, sitting behind waist-high weeds and a rusted iron fence. 6 stories of stained brick rose above the trees. Half the windows were boarded over. The old Blackwood Hotel sign had lost 3 letters, leaving black OD glowing faintly whenever the wind made the electrical conduit twitch. The county notice was impossible to miss. Condemned. Red paper. Black letters. Bolted directly across the front doors. I stood there with cold coffee in one hand and the auction packet in the other. The place smelled like wet leaves, mildew, and old wood. I loved it immediately. That probably tells you more about me than it should. I'd spent 20 years as a general contractor, mostly rebuilding properties after fires, floods, bankruptcies, and owners who discovered too late that neglect compounds faster than interest. Blackwood had plenty of neglect, but it also had bones. Hand-cut limestone foundations, oak staircases, copper flashing beneath the ruined roofline, a ballroom with 12-foot windows buried behind plywood. Built in 1938, it had once been the kind of hotel where businessmen wore hats to dinner and bellmen remembered your name. By the time I found it, pigeons owned the penthouse. The asking price was $312,000 for 6 stories and nearly 4 acres. That number scared everyone else away because the rehabilitation estimate was almost 3 times that. I wasn't buying a finished hotel. I was buying several years of work, and work had never frightened me. What interested me more was the land. Blackwood sat on an odd rectangular parcel surrounded on 3 sides by Cedar Ridge Estates, a polished subdivision of stone entrances, identical mailboxes, trimmed hedges, and houses starting north of $700,000. The hotel had been there decades before the first Cedar Ridge foundation was poured. That mattered. At closing, my title agent slid a stack of documents across a walnut conference table. Deed, survey, tax records, environmental disclosures. My signature appeared so many times my wrists started aching. One page caught my attention. It was an old boundary survey copied from an earlier plat. The paper had been folded badly, hiding part of the basement footprint beneath the crease. Near the lower corner was a tiny notation. B. 214. I assumed it meant boiler equipment. I initialed the page and kept signing. That folded corner would come back to haunt Vanessa Harwood. At the time, I didn't even know her name. I learned it 48 hours later. I was standing outside Blackwood with a structural engineer when a white Lexus rolled through the open construction gate. Vanessa stepped out without introducing herself. Blonde hair, pearl earrings, cream-colored jacket, leather folder tucked against her ribs. Her perfume reached me before her handshake did. So you're the buyer. Not congratulations. Not welcome. Just confirmation. Ethan Mercer. She barely acknowledged my hand. Vanessa Harwood, president of Cedar Ridge Estates. She looked past me at the hotel like someone inspecting a stain. We had hoped the county would finally remove this structure. I'm restoring it. That stopped her. For maybe 2 seconds. Then came the smile. Thin. Controlled. I'm not sure the community will support that. I glanced toward the condemned notice. Good thing the community didn't buy it. Her eyes hardened. That was the first time I saw what lived underneath the polished HOA president routine. She opened her folder and started talking about dumpsters, contractor parking, exterior appearance, noise, landscaping, and community standards. I listened. Then I asked one question. Is Blackwood actually inside your HOA? Silence. A lawn mower hummed somewhere beyond the trees. Vanessa closed the folder. Properties affect more than their legal boundaries, Mr. Mercer. Then she looked toward the hotel. Not at the broken roof. Not at the boarded windows. Her eyes dropped toward the narrow basement windows along the foundation. How much work are you planning to do downstairs? I remember that question because it seemed strangely specific. 3 weeks later, standing beside a steel door marked 214, I finally understood why. Vanessa's first violation notice arrived before I had electricity restored to the second floor. It was taped to the construction fence in a clear plastic sleeve, perfectly centered like somebody had measured the placement. Unapproved commercial dumpster. I stared at it while my generator coughed diesel fumes into the morning air. The dumpster was permitted by the county. I emailed Vanessa the permit. 2 days later, another notice appeared. Contractor vehicles creating community congestion. My crew parked entirely on my property. I sent photographs showing the boundary markers. Then came excessive construction noise, improper exterior lighting, unsightly temporary fencing, landscape deterioration. That last one almost made me laugh. Blackwood had been abandoned for 11 years. Poison ivy had swallowed half the rear fence before I bought the place. Yet suddenly Vanessa was concerned about landscaping. Every complaint carried the Cedar Ridge letterhead. Every one ended with the same sentence. Failure to comply may result in additional enforcement action. There was just one problem. Nobody could explain what authority Cedar Ridge had over Blackwood. Daniel pulled the recorded covenants. My parcel wasn't listed. He checked amendments. Still nothing. The subdivision wrapped around my land like 3 fingers around a glass, but legally, Blackwood remained outside the HOA. That should have ended it. Instead, Vanessa became more persistent. She began appearing at the property twice a week. Sometimes she brought another board member. Sometimes she came alone. She never wore work boots. Watching her navigate broken concrete in polished loafers became one of the few entertaining parts of the renovation. One afternoon, I was measuring rotten joists in the ballroom when I heard her heels clicking across the marble lobby. Sharp, slow, deliberate. Mr. Mercer? I leaned over the railing. Up here. She looked around at exposed wiring and plastic sheeting. You're doing extensive work. That's usually how restoration works. Her smile tightened. I hope you've considered the effect on surrounding property values. I climbed down. Dust coated my sleeves. Sawdust stuck to the sweat along my forearms. Vanessa stayed 6 feet away like honest labor might be contagious. The building was condemned, she said. Demolition would be cleaner. For whom? The community. There was that word again. Community. Vanessa used it the way some people used a master key. I pulled the county rehabilitation approval from my clipboard and handed it over. She barely glanced at it. Instead, her eyes moved toward the hallway leading to the service stairs. Have you cleared the lower level yet? I watched her face. Why? A fraction of hesitation. Then the polished smile returned. Old buildings can have hazardous storage areas. That's what inspectors are for. Of course. She handed back my permit. The next week, she asked whether the basement had original utility rooms. 3 days later, she wanted to know if I'd found old hotel records. Then she asked Luis whether any sealed rooms had appeared on our plans. Luis told me that one over lunch. The smell of hot asphalt drifted from a roofing truck while he unwrapped a sandwich. She's fishing for something, boss. I already knew. I just didn't know what. So I started documenting her visits. Dates. Times. Questions. Every letter went into a binder. Every email got saved twice. I even photographed the notices before removing them from the fence. Then, on Friday afternoon, Vanessa made her first real mistake. She stood beside her Lexus while I locked the construction gate. You're wasting money restoring this place, she said. Probably. You could sell. To Cedar Ridge? Her eyes met mine. We consider a reasonable offer. I slid the padlock shut. Click. Not interested. For the first time, the smile disappeared completely. Vanessa stepped closer. When you start opening things that have been closed for a long time, Mr. Mercer, you should understand that ownership can become complicated. Then she drove away. 4 days later, my demolition hammer hit steel behind the basement wall. The sound changed before the wall did. Luis had been running the demolition hammer through a section of old brick when the hard percussion suddenly ended in a deep metallic boom. He released the trigger. Dust rolled through the basement. What the hell was that? I stepped closer. Hit it again. He pressed the bit forward. Boom. Not pipe. Not reinforcement. Something big. We switched to hand tools and started peeling away brick carefully. The mortar was newer than the foundation around it, which meant somebody had deliberately built this wall after the hotel was constructed. 20 minutes later, a curved steel edge appeared. Then a hinge. Then the door. By the time we cleared the last bricks, nobody was talking. The thing was enormous. 7 feet high. Thick steel. Mechanical dial. Heavy locking handle. Rust had spread across the surface in dark veins, but the door itself looked brutally intact. Luis whistled. Someone really didn't want visitors. I brushed debris from the center. A small brass cedar tree emerged beneath my glove. Below it, my stomach tightened. I had seen that number before. The folded survey. B-214. I pulled out my phone and photographed everything before anyone touched another inch. Tools down. Luis raised an eyebrow. We opening it? Not today. I called Daniel. He listened without interrupting. Photograph the door, wall, floor, hinges, everything around it. Don't manipulate the dial. Don't drill it. And Ethan? Yeah. Keep people out of that basement. 47 minutes later, gravel crunched outside. Vanessa's Lexus. She entered through the lobby so quickly I barely had time to wonder who had called her. Nobody had. She descended the service stairs with 2 HOA board members behind her, both wearing the uncomfortable expressions of men who had been told they were attending something important without being told why. Vanessa stopped when she saw the steel door. No surprise. That bothered me more than anything. She looked directly at the lock. Give me the key. What key? The vault key. Louise glanced at me. I folded my arms. We don't even know whether there is one. Vanessa opened her leather folder and removed a photocopied diagram. That chamber is historical association property. Based on what? Cedar Ridge was developed from the original Blackwood holdings. That doesn't answer my question. Her jaw tightened. One board member cleared his throat. Vanessa ignored him. The contents may include association records. You are not authorized to access them. I almost laughed. She was standing inside my building telling me I wasn't authorized to enter part of it. Show me the deed. She pushed the diagram toward me. Yellow marker covered several parcels around Blackwood. My hotel wasn't highlighted. Neither was the basement. This is not a deed. It establishes historical use. No, it establishes that somebody owns a yellow marker. Louise coughed into his fist. Vanessa's eyes flashed. You're making a serious mistake. I photographed the diagram. Then I photographed her standing beside the vault. That ended the conversation. The next morning, a certified envelope arrived. Cedar Ridge demanded that I cease all work within 10 feet of B-214, surrender any keys or combinations, and allow the HOA attorney to inventory the chamber. They called it the Association Historical Records Vault. Daniel read the letter twice. Then he leaned back. There's something wrong here. What? He tapped one line with his finger. They're claiming this vault belonged to the HOA. So, Cedar Ridge Estates HOA was incorporated in 1996. I waited. Daniel looked at me. According to your hotel records, that basement wall was sealed no later than 1987. The room went quiet. 9 years. The vault had disappeared behind brick 9 years before Cedar Ridge HOA legally existed. Yet Vanessa hadn't called it a room. She hadn't called it a safe. She knew its designation. B-214. I looked down at her demand letter. For the first time, I stopped wondering what was inside the vault. I started wondering what Vanessa was afraid I would find. Daniel's advice was simple. Don't open that door. I hated it immediately. The vault was 20 feet beneath a building I owned, surrounded by concrete included in my deed, and an HOA with no recorded claim had just ordered me to surrender something I didn't possess. Every instinct told me to hire a locksmith and settle the argument by lunchtime. Daniel shook his head. That's exactly what Vanessa wants. The radiator in his office clicked behind us. I could smell burnt coffee from a pot that had probably been cooking since sunrise. If you open it now, he continued, she'll claim you destroyed evidence, removed association property, contaminated records, whatever gives her leverage. Make her prove ownership first. So I waited. Vanessa did not. By Monday, a red notice had been zip-tied across Blackwood's construction gate. Property access dispute pending. It looked official until Daniel read the bottom. Issued by Cedar Ridge Estates Association. Not the county. Not a court. Not anybody with authority over my parcel. I cut it down and filed it with the others. Tuesday brought an attorney's letter demanding access to B-214 within 72 hours. Wednesday, Vanessa emailed my structural engineer claiming the basement contained restricted historical materials. Thursday, 2 Cedar Ridge residents appeared outside the fence asking why I was holding community records hostage. That phrase caught my attention. Hostage. Someone was shaping the story. I asked who told them. They exchanged uncomfortable looks. Vanessa mentioned it at the board meeting. Of course she did. That afternoon, Daniel requested every document supporting Cedar Ridge's claim. Deeds, easements, recorded covenants, transfer agreements, inventories, anything connecting the HOA to B-214. What came back was 43 pages of noise, meeting minutes, a neighborhood history brochure, photocopied development maps, a 2004 board resolution declaring the hotel basement historically associated with Cedar Ridge. Daniel dropped the stack onto his desk. Paper slapped wood. There. I looked at the resolution. They're what? That's their problem. He pointed at the signature date. They voted themselves an interest in property they didn't own. A board resolution could establish HOA policy. It couldn't rewrite my deed. More importantly, none of their documents explained how Vanessa knew the designation B-214. So I went backward. Not through HOA records. Through Blackwood's. The county archive occupied the basement of an old municipal building downtown. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, while a clerk rolled out boxes that smelled like cardboard and dust. Building permits. fire inspections, insurance schedules, renovation applications. Most were useless. Then I found a 1987 fire safety inspection, basement storage, boiler room, laundry, electrical room, and one handwritten line near the bottom. B. 214, records room, sealed pending ownership transfer. I read it 3 times. Not association vault. Records room. Ownership transfer. The inspection date was November 1987. Cedar Ridge HOA wouldn't exist until 1996. I photographed the page. Then another document surfaced. A faded insurance inventory from the company that once owned Blackwood and hundreds of surrounding acres. At the top was its name, Cedar Ridge Land Company. Beside it sat the same cedar tree emblem stamped into my vault door. My pulse kicked harder. The HOA had borrowed more than a neighborhood name. It had inherited the branding of the old development company. But inheritance of a name wasn't inheritance of property. I called Daniel from the archive hallway. I found the cedar. What cedar? The symbol on the vault. It belonged to Cedar Ridge Land Company. Silence. Then paper moved on his end. Ethan, come back here. Why? I found something too. His voice had changed. One of Vanessa's old board minutes mentions B. 214. I stopped walking. How old? 7 years. The hallway suddenly felt very quiet. 7 years before I bought Blackwood, Vanessa Harwood had already been asking about a room hidden behind a wall. She hadn't discovered my vault. She had been waiting for someone else to discover it. The board minutes were 7 years old, but Vanessa's fingerprints were all over them. Daniel slid the photocopy across his desk. March 14, 2019. Cedar Ridge Estates Board Meeting. Near the bottom, buried between landscaping expenses and pool repairs, one sentence had been typed in smaller text. President Harwood requested legal review regarding historical records believed stored in Blackwood Hotel, basement designation B. 214. I felt the paper stiffen between my fingers. She knew the room number. Long before you owned the hotel. Did their lawyer answer? Daniel tapped the next page. The response was almost painfully clear. No recorded ownership interest located. No documented access right. Further action not recommended. I read it twice. Vanessa had asked. Her own attorney had told her Cedar Ridge couldn't establish a claim. Yet 7 years later, the moment my crew uncovered that steel door, she marched downstairs demanding keys. That wasn't confusion. That was preparation. We spent the next 2 days reconstructing Blackwood's chain of title. The story began in 1938, when Cedar Ridge Land Company built the hotel as the centerpiece of a private resort covering nearly 600 acres. The company owned the hotel, woods, service roads, and the fields where Cedar Ridge Estates would eventually stand. Then the business collapsed. Parcels were sold. Roads were transferred. Developers came and went. By 1994, most of the surrounding acreage had been purchased for residential construction. But the hotel parcel stayed separate. So did everything permanently attached to it, including the basement, including B. 214. The title records were dry enough to put a caffeinated man to sleep, but one document changed everything. A 1993 transfer schedule listed exactly what the residential developer received from Cedar Ridge Land Company. Road easements, utility corridors, drainage rights, 2 stone entrance monuments. No hotel, no basement, no records room. Daniel leaned back. If B. 214 was part of Blackwood when you bought the parcel, absent some separate recorded interest, it transferred with the property. So the vault is mine. The room appears to be yours. Contents can raise separate questions depending on what they are. That distinction mattered. I wasn't interested in stealing anybody's documents. I wanted the truth documented so cleanly that Vanessa couldn't smear fingerprints across it afterward. Then another piece surfaced. Walter Keene. His name appeared repeatedly in old inspection records, so I tracked him down through a retired hotel employees group. He was 81 and lived 40 minutes away. When I showed him the photograph of the vault, his weathered fingers stopped on the cedar emblem. I haven't seen that door in 35 years. The coffee shop suddenly seemed quieter. You knew it. Walter nodded. That wasn't a bank vault. Company archive. Why brick it up? His eyes narrowed. Ownership fight. He remembered boxes being moved into B. 214 during the late 80s while Cedar Ridge Land Company was selling property. Maps, contracts, easement schedules, original subdivision agreements. Then lawyers arrived. The room was sealed. Months later, The company dissolved. Did the HOA ever own it? Walter laughed once. There wasn't an HOA. That evening I returned to Blackwood alone. Rain tapped against boarded windows. Water hissed through temporary gutters outside. I went downstairs carrying a flashlight. The vault waited beneath the work lights, silent and black. I ran my fingers across the brass cedar. Vanessa didn't want an antique door. She wanted whatever paperwork had survived behind it. My phone buzzed. Another email from her. Final demand for access. I smiled. For weeks, Vanessa had controlled the pressure. Now I had the deed, the transfer schedule, her 2019 board minutes, and a living witness who remembered why B-214 existed. I forwarded the email to Daniel without answering. Then I sent 3 words. Let her talk. Because the more Vanessa demanded something she had already been told wasn't hers, the more useful every demand became. Silence turned out to be the most expensive thing Vanessa ever gave me. For 3 days, I answered none of her accusations personally. Daniel handled everything. That drove her crazy. The emails started arriving before breakfast. 8:06 a.m. failure to cooperate. 10:41 a.m. possible destruction of association records. 2:17 p.m. demand for immediate surrender of all access devices related to B-214. Every message made the same assumption. That Cedar Ridge owned something behind that door. Every message became another page in Daniel's file. Meanwhile, I made the basement boringly secure. 2 cameras covered the corridor. A third faced the vault. Luis installed temporary plywood barriers around the work zone, and I changed the exterior construction locks. Nobody entered without being recorded. Then I hired a certified safe technician named Owen Price. He was 60, broad-shouldered, with gray hair and hands scarred by 30 years of working steel. He studied the door without touching it. Old commercial archive vault. Can you open it? Probably. He leaned toward the dial. But probably isn't how you want this done. Exactly. Owen photographed the lock, documented its condition, and wrote a preliminary report stating there was no visible evidence the door had been opened recently. Daniel arranged for a title representative and independent videographer to attend the eventual opening. If anything inside belonged to someone else, we would catalog it. No disappearing boxes. No mysterious missing papers. No chance for Vanessa to rewrite what happened. While we prepared, I did something she clearly didn't expect. I acted uncertain. When she called from an unfamiliar number, I answered. Ethan, this can still be resolved privately. Her voice was softer now, almost friendly. I stood in Blackwood's lobby watching rain streak the boarded glass. How? Give us access before your attorney turns this into unnecessary litigation. What exactly are you expecting to find? A pause. Tiny. But there. Historical association materials. Such as records. What records? Another pause. Property documents. There it was. Not photographs. Not hotel memorabilia. Property documents. I let several seconds pass. The building creaked around me. Vanessa, if you already know what's inside, why don't you send Daniel an inventory? Her tone sharpened. I didn't say I know what's inside. No, you just keep describing it. She hung up. I saved the call log and wrote down every word I could remember. The following evening, Daniel called. You're going to enjoy this. He had received another formal demand from Cedar Ridge's attorney. Attached was a sworn declaration signed by Vanessa. She claimed B-214 had historically housed documents governing common access, easements, and community development rights. Daniel read that sentence aloud. I stared at the vault photograph on my laptop. She just got more specific. Very. How would she know? That, Daniel said, is becoming the useful question. We scheduled the opening for Friday at 9. Vanessa received written notice that the vault would be opened under controlled conditions and that any clearly identifiable third-party property would be preserved. Her response arrived 19 minutes later. Do not open B-214. All capital letters. Then another message. Cedar Ridge would seek emergency court intervention. By Thursday afternoon, nothing had been filed. At 6:12 p.m., Vanessa's Lexus appeared outside Blackwood. She stayed beyond the locked gate. I walked toward her, but stopped on my side. Cold wind carried the smell of rain and fresh-cut lumber between us. You don't understand what you're doing, she said. Then explain it. Her fingers tightened around her phone. Some doors were sealed for a reason. I looked back at the dark hotel, then at her. Tomorrow we'll find out. For once, Vanessa had nothing to say. She drove away. The next morning, at exactly 9, Owen Price placed his tool case on the basement floor. Daniel started the camera. The dial turned. Click, click, click. Then something heavy moved inside the steel. The first thing that came out of B-214 wasn't treasure. It was air. Cold, stale air pushed through the opening with the smell of rust, paper, and something faintly chemical, like an old library trapped inside a toolbox. Owen stepped back. Seal finally broke. The steel door moved another inch. Then another. Its hinges groaned so deeply I felt the vibration through my boots. Daniel kept the camera running. Everybody stays where they are. Owen pulled the door fully open. My flashlight cut through darkness. Shelves. Boxes. Dozens of them. No gold bars. No stacks of cash. No mysterious paintings worth millions. Just gray archival boxes coated in 30 years of dust. I laughed under my breath. Vanessa had nearly started a legal war over paperwork. Then I remembered how desperately she'd tried to stop us. Maybe paperwork was exactly the point. We entered slowly. Every shelf was photographed before anything moved. Labels covered the boxes. Property transfers. Utility easements. Residential development. Road access. Water rights. Daniel stopped beside me. Well, still think these are hotel menus. He didn't smile. The title representative began logging box numbers while Owen examined a smaller steel cabinet against the rear wall. I pulled one file from a shelf marked 1991 to 1994. Inside were survey maps. Originals, not photocopies. Heavy drafting paper crackled beneath my fingers as I unfolded the first sheet across a table. Blackwood sat in the center. Around it stretched the land that would become Cedar Ridge Estates. Colored lines marked drainage corridors, utility routes, and private access lanes. Then Daniel pointed to a handwritten notation. Look, one road currently maintained by the HOA crossed a narrow strip identified as revocable service access, Blackwood Hotel parcel. Not permanent community access. Revocable. We opened another folder. Then another. The pattern got worse. Several amenities Cedar Ridge had treated as association-controlled were governed by old agreements containing restrictions that didn't match the modern HOA's claims. A drainage easement had limited purposes. A service lane had conditions. A landscaped buffer the HOA described as common property appeared on the original survey as belonging to the Blackwood parcel. Daniel's voice dropped. This needs a full title review before anyone draws conclusions. Exactly. We weren't going to manufacture a victory. We were going to document one. Then the title representative opened box 214 to 17. Inside sat a thick binder stamped Cedar Ridge Residential Development, Original Agreements. The cedar emblem was embossed across the cover. My pulse thudded in my ears. Near the back was correspondence between Cedar Ridge Land Company and the developer who purchased the residential acreage. One letter discussed transferring specific rights while explicitly retaining others with Blackwood. Another warned that temporary service privileges should not be represented to future homeowners as permanent ownership rights. Daniel read that paragraph twice. Then he looked at me. This explains why somebody might want the originals. My phone vibrated. Vanessa. I let it ring. A second call followed. Then a text. Stop immediately. HOA counsel is on the way. Daniel saw it. Don't answer. 23 minutes later, heels hammered down the basement stairs. Vanessa appeared with her attorney behind her. She reached the doorway and froze. Her face didn't change when she saw me. It changed when she saw the open boxes. The color drained from her cheeks. These documents belong to Cedar Ridge. Daniel stepped between her and the table. Please identify the recorded instrument establishing that ownership. Vanessa didn't answer. Her eyes locked onto the binder. Not the room. Not the vault. That binder. I watched her stare at it. And suddenly 7 years of questions made sense. She hadn't been trying to recover HOA records. She'd been trying to control the originals before anyone compared them with what Cedar Ridge had been telling homeowners. Vanessa finally looked at me. You have no idea what you've opened. I rested my hand beside the old survey. No, Vanessa. The camera's red recording light glowed between us. But I think you do. Vanessa's attorney was the first person in the room smart enough to stop talking. He studied the open binder, then the camera, then Daniel. Nothing leaves this room today. Daniel nodded. Agreed. Vanessa turned toward him. What are you doing? Protecting everyone involved. That sentence landed harder than an accusation. Within 48 hours, digital copies of the relevant records were delivered to both legal teams and an independent title examiner. The originals stayed secured inside Blackwood under documented access. Then the homeowners started asking questions. The first emergency Cedar Ridge meeting drew 87 residents. I attended with Daniel. The clubhouse smelled like coffee, carpet cleaner, and nervous sweat. Folding chairs filled every aisle. People stood along the walls holding copies of assessments, property maps, and old HOA notices. Vanessa sat behind the board table. No cream jacket this time. No smile. Daniel presented the findings carefully. The documents didn't magically invalidate Cedar Ridge. They did something more damaging. They contradicted specific claims the board had made about certain property rights. The old service road? Not association property. The landscaped buffer beside Blackwood? Recorded with my parcel. Several access privileges? Conditional agreements, not blanket ownership. Then Daniel displayed Vanessa's 2019 board minutes. The room changed. 7 years earlier, she had asked counsel about B-214. 7 years earlier, counsel had reported no recorded HOA ownership interest. Yet after I discovered the vault, Vanessa repeatedly described it as association property and demanded control of its contents. A man in the second row stood. You already knew you didn't own it? Vanessa gripped her microphone. That is an oversimplification. Someone laughed. Not loudly. That made it worse. Another homeowner asked why residents had been told certain access rights were permanent. Then another wanted copies of historical easement documents. Then 5 more hands went up. The meeting dissolved into questions Vanessa could no longer bury beneath procedure. The board voted that night to appoint independent counsel and suspend her authority over property matters pending review. 3 weeks later, Vanessa resigned as president. Cedar Ridge formally withdrew every demand involving B-214 and acknowledged it had no established ownership claim to the room itself. The broader title issues took months to untangle. Some HOA practices survived review. Others were corrected. Several property descriptions and access arrangements had to be clarified. That mattered to me. Justice isn't replacing one exaggeration with another. It's putting the documents on the table and letting facts survive the noise. Blackwood survived too. A year later, the condemned notice was gone. The ballroom windows had been restored. The roof no longer leaked. New copper fixtures glowed against the old brick, and guests could walk through the lobby without wondering whether the ceiling intended to join them. I kept B-214, not as a vault, as an archive room. We cleaned the steel door, but left the scratches, rust stains, brass cedar emblem, and stamp number exactly where they had been. Beside it, behind glass, I framed Vanessa's first certified demand. Surrender all keys and access devices. Funny thing was, there had never been a key. Owen opened the vault through the original mechanical lock. Sometimes I stand in that basement after everyone leaves. The hotel settles around me. Pipes hum. Floorboards creak overhead. The restored ventilation carries the faint smell of old brick and fresh-cut oak. And I think about Vanessa standing there that first afternoon, hand extended, demanding something she believed would keep the past under control. She thought ownership came from confidence, from letterhead, from saying community property loudly enough that nobody checked. She was wrong. I bought a condemned hotel and found a sealed vault. Vanessa demanded the key before I even knew there was a lock. That was her mistake. Because once that door opened, it wasn't my hotel hiding secrets anymore. It was her HOA.